Emily Carter was still wearing her engagement dress when she ran into the storm. The pale blue silk clung to her body as rain struck the private estate behind her. Music continued inside the ballroom. Hundreds of candles burned beneath crystal chandeliers. Guests were still drinking champagne beneath a banner, celebrating the engagement of Emily Carter and Victor Hale. No one inside knew that the future bride had escaped through the catering entrance. No one except Victor. Emily heard his voice behind her before she reached the line of parked cars. Victor called her name and ordered her to stop. She did not turn around. Her shoes slipped on the wet stone path. One heel snapped. She kicked both shoes away and continued barefoot across the lawn. Victor followed. His footsteps were calm. That frightened her more than shouting would have. Emily reached the black iron gate and pulled at the handle. It was locked. Victor stopped several feet behind her. He told her she was embarrassing herself. Emily turned. Rain had flattened his dark hair against his forehead. His expensive dinner jacket remained buttoned. His expression was almost gentle. Only his eyes revealed the truth. He enjoyed watching her panic. Emily told him she would not marry him. Victor looked toward the glowing mansion. He reminded her that her father had already signed the preliminary merger agreement. Carter Industries would collapse unless Hale Capital provided emergency financing. Thousands of employees would lose their jobs. Her parents would lose their estate. Her younger sister would lose every privilege she had ever known. Emily said, none of that gave him the right to own her. Victor approached slowly. He told her that ownership was the foundation of marriage. Emily moved along the gate, searching for another exit. Victor caught her wrist. Pain moved up her arm. He had gripped her in public before. He had smiled while doing it. He had learned how to hurt her without leaving marks where cameras could see. This time, he did not bother hiding his strength. He said she had been allowed to behave like a spoiled girl for too long. Emily tried to pull away. His fingers tightened. Victor told her that after the wedding, she would learn obedience. She would stop arguing. She would stop eating in public when he told her not to. She would stop wearing clothes that drew attention to a body he considered embarrassing. She would smile beside him, produce an heir, and sign whatever documents he placed in front of her. Emily stared at him. For years, her family had called Victor disciplined, ambitious, and respectable. In the rain, Emily finally saw him clearly. He was not offering to save her family. He was purchasing the right to break her. Emily lifted her free hand and drove the diamond engagement ring across his face. Victor released her. Blood appeared along his cheek. Emily pulled the ring from her finger and threw it into the grass. Then she ran. A delivery truck was leaving through the service gate. Emily climbed onto the narrow step and begged the driver to take her to the highway. The elderly driver looked at her torn dress and bare feet. He did not ask questions. He drove. 20 minutes later, Emily stood beneath the awning of a roadside diner while rain poured across an empty parking lot. She had no purse. Her phone had fallen somewhere on the estate lawn. Her father controlled her bank accounts. Her mother controlled the family drivers. Victor controlled the private security company that would already be searching for her. Emily looked through the diner window. A few customers sat beneath yellow lights. A tired waitress carried coffee between tables. At the counter, a broad-shouldered man in a dark work shirt ate alone. Emily recognized him 3 weeks earlier. Victor had brought her to the same diner after a business meeting. He had insulted the waitress for spilling a small amount of water beside his plate. When Emily defended the woman, Victor had gripped Emily beneath the table and told her to be silent. The mechanic at the counter had seen it. He had stood, crossed the room, and told Victor to release her. He had spoken quietly. Victor had laughed at the grease on his hands. The mechanic had looked at him without blinking. Something in that look had made Victor release Emily. The mechanic had returned to his coffee without asking for thanks. Now Emily pushed through the diner door. A bell rang above her. The waitress stared at Emily, then rushed forward with a towel. The mechanic turned on his stool. His eyes moved over Emily slowly. He noticed the torn dress, the mud on her legs, the red marks around her wrist. His face did not change, but the room seemed to become colder. Emily remembered his name from the patch on his shirt. Damien. She approached him. Damien asked who had hurt her. Emily said Victor. Damien placed money beside his plate and stood. He asked where Victor was. Emily told him she did not want Victor found. She wanted somewhere Victor could not reach. Damien studied her. He was tall, powerfully built, and unusually still. Dark hair framed a hard face marked by a thin scar near one eyebrow. Ink disappeared beneath the sleeve of his work shirt. He looked like a mechanic. He felt like something else. Damien told the waitress to bring Emily coffee and food. Emily said she had no money. Damien replied that he had not asked whether she did. She should have been offended by the authority in his voice. Instead, relief nearly brought her to tears. The waitress led Emily to a booth. Damien sat across from her. He did not ask for the story immediately. He waited until she had wrapped both hands around the warm coffee cup. Then he asked what Victor wanted. Emily told him about Carter Industries. Her grandfather had founded the company. Before his death, he had created a trust granting Emily 22% of voting shares when she married. Her father had never forgiven him for that decision. Victor had offered enough financing to save the company, but only if Emily married him and placed her shares under his management. Damien asked why her father had agreed. Emily said her father had always believed the company mattered more than the people inside it. Damien asked what she wanted. The question silenced her. No one in her family had asked that. Emily looked toward the dark window. She said she wanted one night in which no one could decide where she slept or whom she married. Damien leaned back. His gaze remained on her face. He told her one night would not solve the problem. Emily agreed. Then an impossible thought entered her mind. It was reckless. It was humiliating. It was also the first idea that offered a door Victor could not immediately close. Emily asked Damien whether he was married. He said no. She asked whether he had a criminal record. Something almost amused moved through his eyes. He said not one that could be found. Emily should have heard the warning. Instead, she placed both palms on the table. She asked him to marry her. The waitress dropped a spoon behind the counter. Damien did not move. He asked Emily whether she understood what she had said. Emily explained that marrying before Victor filed the merger documents would activate her trust. If she married someone who refused to sign away her shares, Victor could not control them. Damien asked whether she always proposed marriage to strangers in roadside diners. Emily said only to strangers who defended women without expecting payment. Damien looked at the bruises around her wrist. He asked how long the marriage would last. Emily said long enough to secure her shares and find legal protection. After that, they could end it. Damien was silent. Emily felt her courage disappearing. She started to apologize. Damien stood. He told her to finish eating. Emily asked where they were going. He said they were going to determine whether she truly wanted freedom or merely wanted a different man to make the decision. Damien drove an old black truck. The interior smelled of leather, cold metal, and cedar. Emily sat beside him, wearing a coat borrowed from the waitress. Rain moved across the windshield. Damien made one phone call. He told someone to keep the county courthouse annex open. He did not explain why the person obeyed. Emily assumed Damien repaired cars for local officials. At the courthouse, a clerk and an elderly judge were waiting. The security guard lowered his head when Damien entered. Emily noticed. Damien noticed her noticing. He offered no explanation. The forms were placed before them. Emily read every page. Damien watched her with quiet approval. When the clerk asked for rings, Emily looked down at her bare fingers. Damien removed a plain silver band from a chain beneath his shirt. He said it had belonged to his mother. Emily refused. She said the marriage was temporary and the ring mattered too much. Damien told her that temporary promises still required respect. He placed the ring in her palm. It fit perfectly. Emily tried not to consider that an omen. The judge began the ceremony. Emily repeated the vows with a trembling voice. Damien spoke his vows without hesitation. When the judge pronounced them, husband and wife, Emily expected Damien to kiss her. He did not. He lifted her injured hand and pressed his lips against her knuckles. His mouth remained there for one quiet second. Heat moved through Emily despite the cold room. Damien said she was safe for the night. Emily asked what happened after the night ended. Damien looked at her with dark, unreadable eyes. He said they would discover who was willing to challenge her husband. They left the courthouse after midnight. Emily Carter entered as a runaway heiress. She left as Emily Russo. She did not yet understand what that name meant. Damien lived above Russo Auto Repair. It's a modest garage in a neighborhood of brick warehouses and narrow streets. The apartment had exposed walls, old wooden floors, and clean furniture chosen for function rather than beauty. There were no photographs except one. A younger Damien stood beside a dark-haired woman with kind eyes. Emily assumed she was his mother. Damien gave Emily the bedroom and prepared to sleep on the couch. Emily told him it was unnecessary. Damien said sleeping in the same bed would confuse the agreement. She asked whether he was afraid of losing control. His gaze moved over her face, her full body, and the shirt the waitress had given her. He answered that control had never been the problem. Then he closed the bedroom door. Emily stood alone, holding the silver ring against her chest. Her family had spent years implying that men would tolerate her only for money. Damien had looked at her as though keeping his distance required effort. That should not have mattered. It mattered too much. The next morning, Emily woke to the sound of engines. She looked through the bedroom window. Damien stood beneath the open hood of a vintage car. Sunlight struck the dark ink on his forearms. Several employees moved around him. No one shouted. No one wasted motion. When Damien spoke, men twice his age listened. Emily went downstairs wearing one of his clean work shirts and a pair of loose pants he had left outside the bedroom. Damien looked up. His expression remained controlled, but his attention stayed on her longer than necessary. He asked whether she had slept. Emily said better than she had in months. He gave her coffee. She asked what happened now. Damien said she needed clothes, identification, and a lawyer. Emily said she needed work. He looked around the garage. She told him she had studied corporate finance. Damien said that seemed unusual for a woman raised to attend charity dinners. Emily replied that she had hoped to work at Carter Industries, but her father had given the position to a cousin who believed quarterly earnings were a type of golf score. Damien pointed toward the office. He told her the books were a disaster. Emily examined the records. They were not merely disorganized. They were strange. The garage received payments from shell companies, private banks, and international shipping firms. Classic cars arrived without owners. Some invoices were larger than the value of the entire building. When Emily asked, Damien said wealthy clients valued privacy. She did not believe him. Still, she reorganized 6 months of records in 2 days. She discovered overpayments, duplicate supplier contracts, and a manager stealing small amounts through equipment purchases. Damien listened to every finding. He fired the manager without raising his voice. The man left pale and shaking. Emily asked whether Damien had threatened him. Damien said the truth had frightened him enough. Days became weeks. Emily expected her family to find her immediately. They did not. Damien told her that the marriage license had been sealed temporarily for security reasons. She asked how a mechanic had arranged that. He said judges sometimes owed favors. She asked what kind of favors. He replied that their cars rarely broke down. Emily knew he was lying, but she was not ready to confront him. Life above the garage became unexpectedly intimate. Damien cooked simple Italian food each evening. He learned that Emily hated mushrooms and loved cinnamon in coffee. Emily learned that Damien slept no more than 4 hours. She learned that he checked every lock twice and never sat with his back toward a door. She learned that men sometimes arrived after midnight in black vehicles. They entered the office carrying no paperwork. They left after Damien gave instructions. One night, Emily saw a pistol beneath the coat of a visitor. She asked Damien whether his clients were dangerous. He said some men became dangerous when they believed money protected them from consequences. Emily asked whether Damien protected them. He answered no. He dealt in consequences. The answer followed her into the bedroom. Attraction grew in the space between questions he would not answer. Damien rarely touched her. That made every accidental contact unbearable. His hand at the center of her back while guiding her through the crowded garage. His fingers around her wrist while examining a healing bruise. His shoulder against hers at the kitchen sink. Each time, he withdrew first. Emily did not know whether the restraint made her feel protected or rejected. One evening, a young supplier named Noah stayed after closing to review an invoice with Emily. He was handsome, friendly, and interested in her in an obvious way. He asked whether Emily would like dinner. Before she could answer, a wrench struck the metal workbench behind them. Damien stood several feet away. His expression was calm. The wrench had bent. Damien told Noah the invoice meeting was finished. Noah left quickly. Emily turned toward Damien. She asked whether he had damaged his own tool because another man invited her to dinner. Damien said the wrench was defective. Emily pointed out that it had been made of hardened steel. Damien looked toward the exit. He said Noah talked too much. Emily reminded him that their marriage was an arrangement. Damien looked back at her. He said arrangements still had boundaries. She asked whether he intended to define those boundaries without consulting her. His gaze moved to her mouth. He approached until she felt the heat of his body. Damien said he had spent 3 weeks sleeping on a couch within 20 feet of her. He had listened to another man ask her to dinner, while knowing that man had no idea how she looked when she woke, how she hummed while reading numbers, or how she pressed her fingers against the ring when she was afraid. Emily forgot how to breathe. She asked whether that sounded like an arrangement. Damien raised one hand. His fingers almost touched her cheek. He stopped before contact. Then he said it sounded like a mistake he had not yet decided how to survive. He walked away. That night, Emily remained awake for hours. The following afternoon, Victor sent men to the garage. 3 black vehicles stopped outside. 6 men entered. The leader said Emily Carter had been abducted and must return home. Damien stood beneath a raised vehicle, wiping oil from his hands. He said Emily Russo had not been abducted. The man laughed at the surname. He asked whether Damien truly believed marrying a frightened heiress would make him part of her world. Damien said he had no interest in her world. The man said Victor Hale owned judges, police officers, and half the city. Damien looked at him. He said, Victor did not own anything that had not been borrowed. The leader moved toward the office where Emily stood. Damien blocked the path. The man reached beneath his coat. Damien struck him before the weapon cleared the fabric. The man hit the floor. Another attacker rushed forward. Damien caught his arm, broke it against the workbench, and placed a pistol beneath his jaw. The garage became silent. Damien told the remaining men to carry their friends back to Victor. He told them that approaching Emily had been the final warning. The men retreated. Emily emerged from the office. She stared at the pistol in Damien's hand. He placed it inside a locked drawer. Emily asked where he had learned to fight. Damien said Boston could be educational. Emily asked why armed men obeyed him after he injured 2 of them. He said fear often produced good judgment. She asked who he really was. Damien looked at her for a long moment. He said he was the man standing between her and Victor. Emily pulled the silver ring from her finger. She placed it on the workbench. She told him that was not enough. Damien became completely still. Emily said she had escaped one life built on secrets and control. She would not remain in another simply because he made the cage feel safer. Damien picked up the ring. He approached her. Emily expected him to force it onto her hand. Instead, he closed her fingers around it. He told her that when she wished to leave, he would not stop her. She asked whether that was a promise. He said yes. She asked whether he would tell the truth before she left. Damien said some truths could place her in greater danger. Emily replied that ignorance had already placed her beside him. His eyes darkened. He told her that if she left the apartment, she must take one of his employees. Emily said that sounded like another order. Damien agreed. He said he could respect her freedom without pretending enemies would respect it. Emily hated the logic because it made sense. She put the ring back on. Damien watched her do it. Neither spoke. That evening, Emily found blood on his shirt. Damien had entered through the apartment door after midnight. He moved carefully, trying to hide the wound beneath his ribs. Emily ordered him to sit. He said it was a shallow cut. She lifted his shirt. The injury was deeper than he admitted. Old scars crossed his body. Bullet wounds, knife wounds, burns. Emily looked at him. Damien did not attempt another lie. She cleaned the wound. His hand gripped the edge of the chair while her fingers moved across his skin. Emily asked who had hurt him. Damien said no one who would have a second opportunity. She asked whether he had killed the person. He looked into her eyes. He said yes. Emily's hands stopped. Fear moved through her. Damien saw it. He told her to leave the room if she needed distance. Emily continued wrapping the bandage. She said being afraid did not mean she would allow him to bleed. Damien watched her. His voice became quiet. He said that was the problem. Emily asked what he meant. He told her that she continued offering kindness to men who had not earned it. She said he had earned some. Their faces were close. Damien lifted his hand toward her cheek. This time, his fingers touched her skin. His thumb moved once beneath her eye. Emily leaned closer. A knock sounded at the apartment door. Damien moved away instantly. An older man entered. His name was Enzo Moretti. He wore an expensive gray suit and carried himself with the same controlled danger as Damien. Enzo looked at Emily, then at the bandage beneath Damien's shirt. He said the situation had changed. Damien led him into the hallway. Emily heard several words. Bellucci, shipment, traitor, Carter debt. When Damien returned, Emily was waiting. She asked what the Carter debt had to do with him. Damien said they would discuss it later. Emily said later had become his favorite place to hide the truth. Damien looked toward the window. A black sedan waited across the street. He told her to pack a bag. She asked why. He said her family had discovered where she was. The Carter family arrived before Emily finished packing. Her father entered first. Richard Carter wore a navy suit and the expression of a man approaching a contaminated building. Her mother, Vivian, looked around the garage with open disgust. Emily, younger sister, Lauren, followed with anxious eyes. Victor entered last. A faint scar crossed his cheek where Emily had struck him with the ring. Victor smiled when he saw her. He said the fantasy was over. Emily moved beside Damien. Damien wore black mechanic pants and a faded work shirt. Grease marked one forearm. To her family. He looked poor. They relaxed. That was their first mistake. Vivian looked at Emily's inexpensive sweater and jeans. She asked how Emily could allow herself to look that way. Emily said she looked like someone who had chosen her own clothes. Richard said she had humiliated the family and endangered thousands of jobs. Emily reminded him that he had traded her to a violent man. Richard called it a necessary marriage. Damien asked Richard whether necessary meant profitable. Richard turned toward him. He asked how much money Emily had offered. Damien said none. Victor laughed. He said men like Damien did not marry heiresses for nothing. Emily stepped forward. Damien placed one arm before her. The gesture was protective, but it also warned everyone in the room that she was under his protection. Victor placed annulment papers on the hood of a car. He told Damien to sign. Richard added a check. He said $100,000 was more than a mechanic could earn in years. Damien looked at the check. He asked Richard whether that was the value he placed on his daughter. Richard said it was compensation for the inconvenience. Emily felt something inside her break. Her mother looked away. Lauren whispered that they should leave. Victor ignored her. He approached Emily and gripped her wrist. He ordered her to come home. Damien moved. 1 second, Victor was standing. The next, Damien had him against a steel pillar with one hand around his throat. Damien told Victor never to touch his wife again. Victor struggled. He said Damien had no idea who he was threatening. Damien answered that he knew exactly who Victor was. He called him a middleman hiding behind borrowed money and Bellucci protection. Victor's face changed. Richard stared at Damien. He asked how a mechanic knew the Bellucci name. The sound of engines rolled through the street. Everyone turned. One black luxury vehicle stopped outside the open garage. Then another, then 6 more. Armed men stepped onto the pavement. Some watched the rooftops. Others formed a path from the vehicles to the garage. Enzo entered first. He buttoned his jacket and lowered his head before Damien. He addressed him as Don Russo. Every armed man outside bowed. Silence consumed the garage. Richard Carter lost all color. Vivian gripped the side of the car. Victor stopped struggling. Emily stared at her husband. Damien released Victor. Victor stumbled away and pressed a hand against his throat. Richard whispered the Russo name. Damien removed the stained cloth from his pocket. His posture did not change. His voice did not change. That was the most terrifying part. The quiet mechanic had not disappeared. The Mafia Boss had been present all along. Enzo placed a leather folder on the workbench. Damien opened it. He told Richard that Carter Industries owed $480 million through 7 separate credit agreements. Richard said the loans belonged to different banks. Damien said those banks had sold the debt. He now controlled all of it. Vivian asked why. Damien said Carter shipping had been used to move Bellucci money and weapons through Boston Harbor. Richard denied knowing anything. Damien placed photographs and financial transfers on the workbench. Emily recognized several accounts she had seen in the garage records. The truth struck her. The strange invoices. The international payments. The private clients. Damien had not merely known her family. He had been investigating them. Richard asked whether Damien had married Emily to gain her shares. Damien looked at Emily. He said no. The answer came without hesitation. Emily asked whether he had known her identity at the diner. Damien said yes. She asked whether he had known Victor was connected to the Bellucci family. He said yes. She asked whether he had known Carter Industries depended on loans he controlled. He said yes. Each answer cut deeper. Emily removed the ring. Damien's eyes dropped toward it. She asked whether she had ever been more than a useful path into the Carter family. Damien moved toward her. Emily stepped back. He stopped immediately. Damien said she had never been an asset. Emily asked why he had hidden everything. He said because, for a few weeks, she had looked at him without fear. Emily felt tears burn behind her eyes. She told him he had allowed her to trust a man who did not exist. Damien said the mechanic existed. Emily said the honest man did not. The words struck him harder than anger would have. Victor smiled from across the garage. He told Emily that Damien had manipulated her. Damien turned toward Victor. The armed men outside shifted. Emily raised one hand. She told Damien not to touch him. Damien obeyed. The room noticed. Emily placed the ring on the workbench. She reminded Damien of his promise. He had said he would not stop her if she wanted to leave. Damien looked at the ring. Then at her. He said Enzo would take her anywhere she wanted. Emily said she did not want his men. Damien's jaw tightened. He said he would respect that. But she could not leave unprotected. Emily said he still believed protection gave him the right to decide. Damien replied that he believed survival came before forgiveness. Emily walked past him. Her family expected her to join them. She did not. She told Richard she would never return home. She told Vivian that silence had made her part of every cruel thing Victor had done. She told Victor that the marriage to Damien might have begun with a lie. But at least Damien had never enjoyed hurting her. Then Emily left the garage alone. Damien remained surrounded by armed men and terrified enemies. He watched her disappear through the open doors. For the first time in years, Don Russo looked powerless. Emily checked into a small hotel under the maiden name of her grandmother. She knew Damien men were nearby. She never saw them. But doors opened before she reached them. A car appeared whenever she stepped onto the street. The hotel manager personally carried her breakfast. Damien was obeying the letter of her demand while refusing to leave her truly unprotected. She should have been furious. Part of her was relieved. 2 days passed. Emily studied the financial records copied from the garage. She realized that Damien had protected Carter Industries from immediate seizure even before their marriage. He could have destroyed her family months earlier. He had not. That did not erase the betrayal. It made it more complicated. Lauren called from a blocked number. She said Richard had locked her phone in his study. Victor had moved into the Carter estate and was pressuring Richard to complete the merger. Lauren had discovered documents connecting Victor to Bellucci Maritime. Emily told her to photograph everything. Lauren said she was afraid. Emily said fear did not mean weakness. A knock sounded at the hotel room door. Vivian stood outside. Her eyes were red. She told Emily that Richard had collapsed at home. Emily asked why he was not in a hospital. Vivian said he refused to go. Emily hesitated. Her mother began crying. She said Richard had asked for Emily. Emily followed her to a waiting car. 5 minutes later, the doors locked. The vehicle turned away from the Carter estate. Victor rose from the rear seat. Emily looked at her mother. Vivian could not meet her eyes. She said Victor had promised to save the company. Emily asked whether her mother had traded her again. Vivian whispered that she was sorry. Victor caught Emily's hand. He told her Damien would come for her. Emily understood. She was not merely a prisoner. She was bait. Victor took her to an abandoned church near Boston Harbor. Broken stained glass covered the floor. Rain entered through holes in the roof. Bellucci soldiers watched from the balconies. Emily was tied to a chair before the altar. Victor walked around her. He asked whether Damien had touched her. Emily said that was not his concern. Victor struck the back of the chair. He said Damien had made him look weak. Emily told him weakness had always belonged to men who needed frightened women. Victor gripped her throat. He said Damien would arrive and die in front of her. Emily stared into his eyes. She said Victor would still be nothing after Damien was gone. Victor raised his hand. Gunfire erupted outside. The church doors opened beneath the force of an armored vehicle. Black headlights cut through the rain. Russo soldiers moved between stone columns. Damien entered alone. He wore a black suit beneath a long coat. Blood marked one cuff. His eyes found Emily. Everything else disappeared from his attention. He asked whether she was hurt. Emily told him her mother had delivered her to Victor. Pain moved through Damien's face. He said he knew. Victor pulled Emily from the chair and pressed a gun against her ribs. He ordered Damien to drop his weapon. Damien placed the pistol on the floor. Victor laughed. He said the great Don Russo had entered a church to die for a woman who had left him. Damien looked only at Emily. He said she had not left him. He had made the place beside him unsafe. The admission broke through her anger. Victor ordered Damien to kneel. Damien lowered himself to one knee. Emily stared at him. Armed men across the city feared this man. Her family had laughed at his dirty clothes. Now he knelt on broken glass because a gun touched her body. Victor asked Damien whether Emily had been worth losing the Russo Empire. Damien said the empire had existed before her. Without her, he no longer cared whether it existed after him. The words struck Emily with devastating force. Movement appeared behind the ruined altar. Enzo waited in the shadows. Damien was not surrendering. He was holding Victor attention. Emily drove her heel onto Victor's foot. The gun shifted. Enzo fired. Enzo. The weapon flew from Victor's hand. Damien crossed the distance. He hit Victor once. Then again. Victor collapsed against the altar steps. Damien lifted the fallen gun and aimed at his head. Emily called his name. He did not respond. She called again. Damien looked at her. She saw murder in his eyes. She also saw fear. Emily told him not to become the monster Victor believed he was. Victor laughed from the floor. He said she still feared her husband. Damien lowered the gun slowly. He told Victor that Emily should fear him. Then he said he feared something more. He feared the day she looked at him and found nothing worth saving. Russo soldiers secured the church. Damien removed his coat and wrapped it around Emily. His hands trembled while he untied her. She asked why he was shaking. He said he had imagined arriving 1 minute too late. He touched the bruises around her throat. His expression became cold enough to silence every man nearby. Emily placed a hand over his. She reminded him that she had asked him not to kill Victor. Damien said Victor, death had only been delayed. Emily told him that was not what she meant. Damien looked at her. For a moment, Don Russo vanished. Only the mechanic remained. He said he did not know how to protect her without destroying everything that threatened her. Emily said he would have to learn. Damien lifted her into his arms. He carried her down the ruined church aisle while rain fell through the broken roof. Armed men lowered their heads as they passed. Victor watched from the altar floor. Emily kept one hand against Damien's chest. His heart struck violently beneath her palm. He had come to the church prepared to lose his empire. She did not yet know whether she could forgive him, but she understood that his lie had not protected a plan. It had protected the only ordinary part of himself he believed she might love. Damien took Emily to a hidden mansion above the Atlantic coast. The house stood behind iron gates and miles of pine forest. Gray waves struck the rocks below. Guards watched every entrance. Emily was given a private room. Damien stayed in another wing. For 2 days, she barely saw him. Doctors examined her bruises. Enzo brought updates about Lauren, who had escaped the Carter estate with copies of the financial records. Victor had disappeared. Marco Bellucci had declared war against Damien. Emily spent hours in the library studying Carter accounts. On the 3rd night, she found Damien in the kitchen. A glass of whiskey rested before him. He had not touched it. Emily asked why he had returned to the garage before meeting her. Damien said someone inside the Russo organization had ordered his assassination. He had survived and allowed the world to believe he had disappeared. The garage had belonged to his mother. It was the only place where he could watch enemies without performing the role of Don Russo. Emily asked why he had not killed the traitor. Damien said he had not yet identified him. She asked whether Victor was involved. Damien said Victor had moved Bellucci money through Carter's shipping. The debt purchase had been part of the investigation. Emily asked whether Damien had planned to use her. He said no. She asked why he had married her. Damien looked toward the dark ocean. He said that at the diner, Emily had defended a waitress even while Victor punished her beneath the table. She had been frightened, but she had still chosen kindness. Damien had remembered her. When she entered the garage in the rain, she looked at him as though he were only a man who had once helped her. No one had looked at him that way in years. Emily said he had allowed her to continue believing the illusion. Damien agreed. He did not defend himself. He said he had wanted more time before fear entered her eyes. Emily asked whether he had developed feelings for her before the marriage. Damien said curiosity came first, then fascination. Then he began returning to the apartment earlier because she was there. He changed suppliers because one man stared at her too long. He memorized the sound of her footsteps. He spent nights on the couch listening to her breathe beyond the wall. Emily's heart raced. Damien continued. He said the first time she placed the ring back on after threatening to leave, relief had frightened him more than any enemy. He had spent his life believing emotional dependence was weakness. Then Emily left the garage, and he discovered weakness was not needing someone. Weakness was lying because he feared she would not choose him after learning the truth. Damien placed a document on the table. It was an annulment agreement. His signature was already present. Emily stared at it. He told her that the Carter debt had been moved into a trust she controlled. Her shares were protected. Lauren was safe. Richard could no longer force her home. Emily asked whether Damien wanted the marriage ended. He said no. She asked why he had signed. He said because freedom meant little if he only offered it when she chose him. Emily looked at the document. Then she looked at the most feared man in Boston. He appeared calm. His hand around the whiskey glass revealed the truth. He was terrified. Emily told him he could walk unarmed into a church, but he could not ask his wife whether she wanted to stay. Damien said she should not stay. Emily asked whether that was her choice or his. He lowered his gaze. Emily moved around the table. She told him she would not remain beside a man who lied to control her. She also would not leave simply because he believed darkness made him unworthy of love. Damien said he had killed people. Emily said she knew. He said he would kill again to protect her. Emily answered that she also knew. He asked whether she feared him. Emily said yes. Pain entered his eyes. Then she told him she trusted him at the same time. Damien looked at her as though those words had broken through armor built over decades. Emily gave him conditions. No more lies. No decisions about her life without her. No using protection as another name for control. Damien agreed to each one. Emily said she was not his property. He said she was not. She asked him to stop speaking as though she belonged to him. Damien approached. He said that condition would be difficult. Emily warned him with his name. Damien stopped before her. He said she did not belong to him. Then he said he belonged to her in ways he did not yet understand. His hand lifted toward her face. He stopped before touching her. Emily leaned into his palm. The final distance disappeared. Damien kissed her. Weeks of restraint broke without becoming careless. His hand settled at her waist. He drew her close. Holding the softness of her body as though there was nothing about her to hide, Emily gripped his shirt. Damien kissed her until the storm beyond the windows seemed distant. Then he pulled away. His forehead rested against hers. He said that if he continued, he would no longer be capable of pretending the marriage was temporary. Emily told him to stop pretending. Damien kissed her again. That night, Emily did not sleep in the private room. By morning, the war had changed. Emily was no longer only someone Damien protected. She became part of the strategy. With Lauren's help, she traced Bellucci payments through Carter accounts. She discovered that Victor had hidden weapons shipments inside insurance claims and maintenance expenses. She also discovered that Richard had learned the truth months earlier. Her father had chosen silence because Victor financing protected his position. The betrayal no longer surprised her. It hardened her. Carter Industries scheduled an emergency board meeting at the headquarters in Boston. Richard planned to remove Emily by declaring her unstable and manipulated by a criminal. Emily attended wearing a deep green dress that honored every curve her mother had taught her to conceal. Damien walked beside her in a black suit. Enzo and 6 Russo soldiers followed. Cameras gathered outside. Victor waited near the entrance with Richard and several attorneys. He looked at the ring on Emily's finger. He asked whether Damien had frightened her into returning. Emily said Damien had given her the documents to leave. She had chosen to stay. Victor told her men like Damien did not love. They acquired. Emily looked toward Damien. He had gone completely still. One command from him could end Victor's life. Emily touched his arm. Damien looked at her. She said she would handle it. He stepped back. Victor noticed the obedience. Fear entered his face. Inside the boardroom, Richard accused Emily of damaging the company through an impulsive marriage. He called her emotional, disloyal, and unqualified. Emily allowed him to finish. Then she displayed the financial records. Payments to Bellucci Maritime filled the screen. Hidden accounts, falsified insurance claims, weapons, routes. Board members began whispering. Victor's attorney demanded that the presentation end. Emily continued. Lauren played a recording from Richard's private study. Richard's voice filled the room. He said that once Emily married Victor, her shares would no longer matter. Victor could control the company, and Emily could be managed at home. Silence followed. Emily looked at her father. She said he had treated her future like an asset on a balance sheet. He had called it sacrifice because he was not the one being sacrificed. Richard turned toward Damien. He accused Damien of engineering the takeover. Damien said the removal of Richard had been designed by his daughter. Emily introduced a motion to suspend her father and terminate the Hale merger. One board member voted in favor. Then another. The motion passed. Richard lost the company. Victor stood. His hand moved beneath his jacket. Emily saw the reflection in the glass wall. She shouted a warning. Damien turned and covered her body. The first shot shattered the window. A second shooter fired from a neighboring rooftop. Russo soldiers returned fire. Board members crawled beneath the table. Damien pushed Emily behind a marble column. He drew his weapon and fired toward the rooftop. Victor ran for the emergency exit. Richard called after him. Victor kicked Richard away. A bullet struck Damien beneath the shoulder. His body jerked. Emily caught him. Blood spread across his white shirt. Damien pressed his pistol into her hand. He told her to remain behind him. Emily said he had been shot. Damien said he was aware. He stood despite the wound. He placed his body between Emily and the open window. The rooftop shooter moved. Emily saw light flash against the rifle. She told Damien the shooter was above the clock tower. Damien fired. The rifle disappeared. Enzo men secured the room. Sirens rose from the street. Victor escaped through a service elevator. Damien looked at Emily. He asked whether she was hurt. Emily pressed both hands against his wound. She asked how he could still think about her. Damien said there had not been room inside him for anything else since the diner. His knees gave way. Emily lowered him to the floor. She ordered him not to die. A faint smile touched his mouth. He asked whether that was another condition of the marriage. Emily said it was the most important one. Damien lost consciousness in her arms. Photographers outside captured the image through the shattered glass. Emily knelt among broken windows while holding the bleeding Mafia Boss against her chest. By evening, the image had spread across the country, the heiress and the criminal, the wife and the empire. Emily did not care. She remained beside Damien through surgery. The bullet had damaged an artery. Doctors warned that the following night would determine whether he survived. Emily held his hand. Near dawn, Enzo entered with a folder. He said they had identified the traitor, Carlo Russo, a cousin Damien had trusted since childhood, had sold information to Bellucci. Emily asked what would happen to Carlo. Enzo silence answered. Then he gave Emily a letter. Damien had written it before the board meeting. Emily opened it. Damien had transferred control of the Carter debt to her. No Russo soldier could prevent her from leaving. No family member could access her shares. The final lines were simple. Damien wrote that he had once believed protecting Emily would be enough. He had been wrong. He wanted to become the man she returned to willingly. He did not know whether he deserved that choice. He only knew that meeting her had made survival matter for the first time. Emily pressed the paper against her lips. She called him an arrogant coward. A weak voice answered from the bed. Damien said that was not the welcome he had expected. Emily looked up. His eyes were open. She laughed and cried at the same time. Damien asked whether she was safe. Emily told him she had spent the night beside his bed while he nearly died. And he still began with that question. Damien said yes. Emily kissed his hand. She told him Victor had escaped. Damien's expression hardened. Emily said they would end the war together. Damien said no. She stared at him. He told her she would not become bait. Emily reminded him that he had walked unarmed into a church. Damien said losing her had removed his ability to reason. Emily leaned closer. She said that was not romantic enough to excuse hypocrisy. Damien almost smiled. Then his expression changed. He said he had spent his life knowing what he could sacrifice. Money, territory, blood, his own life. Then Emily appeared. For the first time, Damien understood that victory could become meaningless if the wrong person was lost. Emily kissed him gently. She said he would still follow the doctor's instructions. Damien said no. Emily spoke his name. He closed his eyes. Then he agreed. Recovery changed the penthouse where Damien lived. The place had once been filled with black stone, glass walls, and silence. Emily brought flowers. She left financial reports across the dining table. She filled the kitchen with cinnamon and fresh bread. She placed photographs of the garage employees beside the cold art chosen by decorators. Damien complained about none of it. At night, he kept one hand around her waist while sleeping. When she moved, he woke. Emily understood that the church and the boardroom had changed him. His obsession no longer hid behind control. It appeared as fear. She refused to allow fear to become another cage. When Damien assigned a guard to stand outside the bathroom, Emily ordered the man away. Damien suggested increasing the distance. Emily refused. Damien removed the guard. Enzo looked amused. The feared Don Russo was learning negotiation inside his own home. Victor disappeared for 12 days. Then, Lauren was taken. Her hotel room was found empty. A photograph showed her tied to a chair inside an abandoned shipyard warehouse. A message demanded the Bellucci ledger. Emily was instructed to come alone. Damien read the message. He said no before Emily spoke. She told him Lauren was her sister. Damien said Russo soldiers would retrieve her. Emily asked whether they understood Victor. No one answered. Victor did not want only the ledger. He wanted Emily to enter voluntarily. He wanted to prove that Damien protection could fail. Damien ordered harbor teams prepared. Emily watched maps cover the penthouse table. No one asked whether Victor might execute Lauren before soldiers entered. Emily went to Damien's office. She opened the locked case containing the Bellucci ledger. She replaced it with a copy filled with altered accounts. Then she left a note beneath the silver ring. Emily left through the service entrance, wearing the coat of a hotel employee. She reached the harbor alone. Fog covered Pier 17. The warehouse stood above black water. Inside, Lauren sat beneath a hanging light. Victor stood beside her. Marco Bellucci waited near the loading doors with armed men. He looked older than Damien, with silver hair and an elegant coat. Bellucci said Emily was the woman who had made Damien careless. Emily asked whether Lauren was hurt. Lauren shook her head. Victor took the case. He asked whether Damien knew she had come. Emily said no. Victor laughed. He said Damien did not respect her freedom. He had merely made control feel like devotion. The words touched an old fear. Emily remembered the annulment papers. She remembered Damien lowering his weapon in the church. She remembered him stepping back in the boardroom because she asked. Power had not made Damien good. Choice had made him capable of becoming better. Emily told Victor he had never understood the difference. Victor opened the ledger. His face changed. He said the numbers were false. Emily looked at Lauren. She told her to run when the lights went out. Victor grabbed Emily's hair. He called her foolish. Emily said he was predictable. The lights died. Gunfire erupted. Black vehicles crashed through the warehouse gates. Russo soldiers entered from 3 directions. Headlights cut through the fog. Damien stepped into the light. He wore a black suit beneath a long coat. His injured shoulder had not fully healed. Fury held him upright. In one hand, he carried Emily. Note, in the other. He held a pistol. Emily said she had told him not to come. Damien said she had married a man who did not follow instructions. Victor pulled Emily toward the loading platform. He placed a gun beneath her jaw. Damien stopped. Bellucci soldiers exchanged fire with Enzo men. Sparks fell from the rafters. Lauren pushed the chair onto its side and crawled toward cover. A shooter appeared above Damien. Emily warned him. Damien turned and fired. The shooter fell behind the railing. Victor forced Emily toward the edge of the platform. Dark water moved below. He told her she had ruined him. Emily said he had ruined himself the first time he believed fear was love. Damien approached slowly. Victor ordered him to stop. Damien continued. He said Victor had always wondered why Emily chose a mechanic. Victor aimed the gun toward him. Damien said she chose him before she knew the name Russo. She chose him without an empire, without soldiers, without money. She chose the man who had stood up in a diner. Victor asked whether Damien believed Emily loved him. Damien looked at her. He said she had crossed a city alone to save her sister. He would spend the rest of his life proving that she never had to stand alone again. Victor turned the gun toward Damien. Emily drove her elbow into his ribs. The weapon fired into the floor. Damien lunged. Victor dragged Emily toward the edge. Her foot slipped. She fell over the platform. Damien caught her wrist. Victor caught the front of Damien's coat. All three hung above the harbor. The wound in Damien's shoulder began to open. Blood spread beneath his coat. Victor smiled. He said Damien could not save both of them. Damien looked at Emily. His grip tightened. He said he had only come to save one. He released Victor. Victor fell into the dark water. Damien pulled Emily onto the platform. He wrapped both arms around her. She felt his body shaking. He said she had left him a note. Emily said she knew he would find it. Damien called that manipulative. Emily said she had learned from dangerous people. Enzo men secured Bellucci. Lauren was freed and ran toward Emily. The sisters held each other beneath the warehouse lights. Federal agents entered through the loading doors. Richard Carter appeared with them. He looked older. He said he had given the authorities every account and shipping route. Emily said he had cooperated to save himself. Richard admitted it. Then he apologized. The apology was too small. Emily looked at Damien. One word from her could have sent Richard into the darkness beneath Russo control. Richard understood. He begged. Emily told Damien to let the courts have him. Damien did not look pleased. He agreed. He said it was her choice. Richard was taken away. Bellucci followed in restraints. Victor's body was recovered from the harbor the following morning. The public called it the end of a corporate scandal. Boston understood the truth. Someone had taken the wife of Damien Russo. An empire had answered. 6 months later, Emily became chairwoman of Carter Industries. She sold the corrupted shipping division. She restored employee pensions. She opened vocational centers for women leaving abusive homes. Lauren managed the company foundation. Richard received a prison sentence. Vivian accepted a plea agreement for assisting the abduction. She wrote letters. Emily was not ready to answer. Some betrayals could be understood without being forgiven. Damien remained Don Russo. He did not become harmless. Enemies still feared his name. Men still lowered their voices when he entered a room. However, legitimate businesses began replacing the cruelest parts of the organization. Damien did not change because Emily ordered him to become a different man. He changed because he wanted a world in which she could stand beside him without losing herself. One bright autumn afternoon, Emily returned to Russo Auto Repair. The garage doors were open. Sunlight covered the concrete floor. Black vehicles waited outside. Damien stood beneath the hood of the same classic car he had been repairing the night she escaped. He wore mechanic clothes. Grease marked his hands. Emily leaned against the workbench. She told him her husband controlled half the harbor, but still refused to hire someone else to repair his car. Damien said his wife controlled $1 billion company, but still reorganized his invoices. Emily said his filing system remained criminal. Damien said that was appropriate. The employees quietly left the garage. The guards turned their backs. Emily asked what he had arranged. Damien wiped his hands. He approached her. He said the first time she entered the garage, she had asked him to marry her because she was running from another man. The first time he agreed. He allowed her to marry a version of him she did not fully understand. Emily told him the mechanic had always been real. Damien looked at her. She touched the scar near his eyebrow. She said the mechanic was real. The Mafia Boss was real. The impossible patient who argued with doctors was also real. Damien said only 2 doctors had resigned. Emily said 3. He accepted the correction. Then Damien took her left hand. He removed the silver ring. He lowered himself onto one knee. The head of the Russo Empire knelt on an oil-marked garage floor. Outside, armed men lowered their eyes. Damien opened a small box. His mother ring rested beside a dark emerald. He said he did not want to replace what his mother had given him. He wanted to add what Emily had given. Emily asked what that was. Damien said she had given him a reason to survive the man he had become. She had seen the truth and stayed long enough to demand more from him. He said he could not promise peace. He could not promise his enemies would stop fearing what she meant to him. He could not promise he would always know how to love without protecting too much. However, he promised there would never be another lie. He promised every decision concerning her life would remain hers. He promised he would never ask her to become smaller so he could feel powerful. Damien lifted the ring. He asked Emily Carter Russo to marry him again, knowing exactly who he was. Emily looked around the garage. The first time she married him, she had been barefoot, bleeding, and desperate. This time, she stood in sunlight. She had a company of her own, a future she controlled, a sister who respected her, a husband powerful enough to rule an empire and brave enough to kneel before her. Emily said yes. Then she told him he still needed to fix the filing system. Damien smiled. It was a rare smile. It belonged to the mechanic, not the Don. He placed the ring on her finger and rose. Emily wrapped her arms around his neck. Damien lifted her easily, holding the full softness of her body against him without hesitation. He kissed her in the center of the garage. Outside, armed men bowed. Not because Damien commanded them, because they understood that the woman in his arms was no longer merely the wife of the mafia boss. She was the only person in the world he trusted with his power. That evening, Emily and Damien exchanged new vows beneath warm lights in the garage courtyard. Lauren stood beside Emily. Enzo stood beside Damien. Mechanics, soldiers, and employees watched two worlds become one. There were no reporters, no hidden contracts, no family bargains, no frightened bride searching for an escape. After the vows, Damien rested his forehead against Emily. He said she was not escaping this time. Emily said no. Damien asked why she was marrying him. Emily looked into the dark eyes of the man her family had feared before she understood his name. She said beneath the empire, the weapons, and the darkness, she had found the only man who never asked her to become smaller so he could feel powerful. Damien kissed her while lights glowed above the open garage. The first time Emily Carter married the poor mechanic, she had been running for her life. The second time, she chose him freely. She chose the danger. She chose the darkness. She chose the man who could own an empire, command an army, and terrify an entire city, yet still kneel before her and ask whether she would stay. Damien Russo had once believed love was a weakness enemies could use against him. Emily taught him the truth. She was not his weakness. She was the reason he finally had something worth protecting without destroying. And as the black vehicles waited beyond the gates, the most feared man in Boston held his wife beneath the lights of a humble garage, knowing that every empire he owned meant less than the simple miracle of being chosen by her twice.